Garrett Heath, welcome to the Singletrack podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
I consider myself to be a super fan of trail running, and I'm always watching the news. And uh, on Instagram, maybe a couple weeks back, I saw you make a post that, to some extent, you were getting involved in the trail scene, and you have this. I'll use the word illustrious track and field and cross country and road career. So, because this is primarily a trail running audience, a mountain ultra trail running audience, could you just give a bit of your background in the track and field world and the road world and your time with like Brooks Beasts, for example?
Yeah. I guess starting a little before the Beast, like I ran in college at Stanford and then stayed around there post collegiately. I think my best college stuff was we won the DMR in college, and I was traditionally a 5K guy that forced my way down to the mile. Ran a lot of the mile in 1500 and then finished second in the 1500 at NCAA's 1 year outdoors. And then went to Saucony actually for about 4 years. Ran for them kind of on my own, doing a little bit of my own thing, training with the Stanford team. And then since then moved up to Seattle and joined the Brooks Beasts. Great to just have a team again and, feel like you're kind of back in those college vibes a little bit of just, having people around you working towards some of the same goals all the time. And yeah, slowly went from my time here being kind of a 1500 mile sort of guy to moving up to like the 5K and most recently dabbling more into the 10K. And, I guess probably biggest accolades are, I think the one that most people know of that probably relates most specifically to the trail audience is cross country winning the great Edinburgh XC race 3 times, and a few kind of big names in there of like Mo Farah, Asbel Kiprop, Bakili, so a bunch of legends that like, I've always looked up to. So it was just kind of really neat to be a part of that race. And then yeah, some, good track stuff along the way too in the 5K, mainly most recently. So
We will make sure to link to it in the show notes, but there's this great YouTube video. I think it must be the final quarter mile, half mile of that Edinburgh race where I think you're out kicking Mo Farah to win it. And it's maybe it was 2016-ish, and just really cool video. And I think it encapsulates how cool that sport is too. So we'll make sure to link that. But I guess my first question is, why are you getting into trails now? What was the motivation there?
yeah, like our family always grew up going to Colorado in the summers, even back in like middle school, high school, going to like basically the Frisco or Buena Vista, Salida sort of areas up in the mountains. And it's, you're basically at somewhere between 8 to 9,000 feet there. And, not doing like training camps necessarily or anything like that, specifically at a young age, but like, just hiking a ton. Family biked a lot. As I got older, like Elliot, my younger brother, and I did more running and stuff like that. But yeah, I think just like this passion for the mountains kind of developed from there. And so I've always had a bit of an eye on like, the trail world and what's happening there. My college roommate is actually Chris Mocco, who's a well-known guy in the trail world, the
Legend.
Mocco show. And so like, through following him and going to, Western states to kind of like track him there, I've both been just like very, very intrigued in the trail world and also like bit scared of some of the long stuff that people undertake, and just kind of mind blown by some of the races. So yeah.
So, and I'm sure we'll get into the details of exactly what you plan to do this year and in years to come. But given that you've been closely associated with Chris Mocco, for example, for I'm guessing over a decade, is the really long distance stuff like the ultra scene, does that appeal to you to any extent?
No, not to start out with anyway. Like maybe there's I'm gonna start shorter and see where this goes. But I mean, seeing some of what he's done and just I think what generally the trail world has. I used to cross country ski back in high school, and Courtney Dauwalter was a year different from me. Also, was a cross country skier runner from Minnesota, and so I followed Courtney a lot. Like, I hadn't, we hadn't stayed in great touch since like high school, but obviously she's like an epic star kind of on the trail scene. So it's been, super fun to just kind of follow along with her success. And, I think I'm like, very like, very inspired and just blown away by what they're doing, but don't kind of see myself as far as like some of those like 100-mile, 200+ mile sort of races or anything like that at this point.
This is going to be a super basic question because I'm just so far removed from these other areas of running. But with that Edinburgh race, for example, and that course in particular, were you training on terrain and on courses that would be similar to the training that you anticipate for races like in this world now? Like, was there a lot of vert on that? Like, what is like the profile of that Edinburgh course look like, for example?
There's a lot of vert for like a track runner, but for a trail runner, there's pretty much zero vert. There's a couple what you would call like maybe mole hills for any trail runner, but I think the big thing with that was like I think the conditions were very muddy. It's run on grass. Like it was snowy or rainy and cold a couple of the years, and yeah, you do just get a bit more undulation. Like you run on some side hills. Like it's not just for coming from the track world where like everything is like incredibly manicured all the time, and like I've been very high maintenance for the past whatever 10-12 years or longer of just like, hey, if it's not like a groomed gravel trail, like I'm probably not running off road, and so like there is a little bit, but like compared to what most trail athletes would consider a trail, this probably wouldn't even qualify for that. So
okay. And then why now? Like it sounds like this has been something that you've been interested in for a while now, but it's 2022. Like what prompted being this year as the year you like dive deeper into it?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit with Brooks for the last couple of years now as a possibility, kind of coming off basically like the 2020 trials was kind of my focus, which then pushed back to 2021.
Yeah.
But I just felt like I was always intrigued by the trails, but I felt like there was still something that there was some unfinished business on the track, and so like I really wanted to see where I could take that before kind of stepping on to the next thing. And felt like the Olympic trials was a good end to that last year. And, so had some time coming off of that where, talked with Brooks, talked with my family, talked with my coach, and just kind of like at that point was like, hey, I think like I'm ready for something new. And I think the trails are, I think they're booming. The trail scene in general is growing pretty dramatically. And so like I was like, yeah, like let's give it a go. And it could be a complete epic failure, but let's have some fun with it.
What does your schedule look like for this year so far?
It's a good question. I just spent like the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to like sift through everything, and like it's hard because like in the trail world there's so many races, whereas like in the professional track world, it's like I was talking to somebody the other day, and it's like there's 2 good 10Ks in the US every year if you're lucky. So like if you're a 10K guy, it's like your options are pretty clear. Like either you're doing the sound running 10K, or you're maybe running a 10K at like Prefontaine, and other than that, like you're not running 10K. So like whereas like then I was looking at the trail calendar the other day, and it's like there's 10 races on any given weekend. And so I guess for me right now, like I've got 2 or 3 kind of potentially pegged for late April, early May, and then June. And I don't know, I just don't know if I'm biting off more than I can chew, or like what, kind of, I guess if I'm going to a race that like people are going to be like, that's not like no one goes to that race. That's not like, that's not a trail race. Or if it's like, hey, you're so far over your head that, it'll kind of just be, hanging on as best I can, middle of the pack. So yeah, nothing for sure yet. I did send it over to Chris Mako actually a couple of days ago and just say, hey, can you take a look through this and see how crazy some of this sounds? So
what are some of the names on the potential list?
I think probably the ones that stick out the most. One is there's and I can't remember if it's the exact name, but it's Canyon something in California there. It's out of Auburn.
Yes, the 25K or the 50K?
The 25K, I think, would be
Cool.
the ultimate starting place for me. And then there's I've heard a lot of good things about, I'm blanking on the other one that's in Lake Tahoe. I think it's like one of the big ones.
Broken Arrow.
Broken Arrow. And then there's kind of one or two others. There's one at Sun Mountain out here in Washington.
Okay.
It's a little bit smaller one. And yeah, a couple others in there that like kind of on the radar, but honestly, like I just keep looking for feedback from anyone that has any idea, or like, people that are experienced in this world, so that, I'm not kind of going too astray for these first couple.
One of the cool things about canyons, there's 3 events there: the 100K, the 50K, and the 25K. And the 100K is a golden ticket race for Western states in June, which is sort of like the crown jewel ultra here in the trail running community. And so you'll get like in addition to a great racing experience and a great course, there's just a lot of fanfare around it, and there'll be like fans of the sport showing up to follow along, which is cool too. So as far as like crowds and cheering goes in trail running, it's a good taste of it. Same with Broken Arrow. I mean, all of those from a viewership standpoint are great in addition to the athlete experience. So that sounds cool to me.
Yeah. I'm excited just to kind of like get in the atmosphere of it and see like how it works. I'm actually planning to go up to Chucknut to the 50K here next, or like in a week and a half now, just to watch. There's a few Brooks athletes going, and a few, kind of part of the company just going to go up and watch. So I'm kind of excited just to see what sort of suffering is happening out there, and just kind of take some of it in. So I know I can start building some of my expectations mentally.
I think you're picking all the right races to spectate and to take part in. I mean, Chucknut is great too. The race director for it is excellent, Chrissy Mole, and the course is amazing too. And man, that's awesome. Do you have a coach for all this? Like, I think one thing I'm curious about is obviously you had a certain regimen on the track and on the roads and in cross country. Does anything change from like the standpoint of who you get coached by and who you surround yourself with in terms of training partners and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's been a complete overhaul basically for me. Very dramatic change. I mean, like from being fully immersed in the track world and being with the Brooks Beast team here, like where we have, I still connect with those guys a bit, and we'll try to like meet up with, both the men and women for some runs and stuff here and there. And I kind of actually hope to this spring do some workouts with them. But like for the most part, like they're doing their own thing. They're going to Albuquerque, training up there. And, obviously they have to be honed in for indoor track. And the outdoor track season is very specific. And with the trail stuff, it's been a lot more kind of bit of a hodgepodge of like just running with different people. Been trying to start meet up with, there's a group here in Seattle. Brian Bark is one of the Brooks shoe trail footwear designers, and as well as like a couple others who are in the area. We have like Adam Fry and Ladia Albertson, and Joe McConaughey.
Yes.
So it's a good group. And so I've just been trying to like meet up with them as much as I possibly can for runs, and just kind of pick their brains and get some of the wisdom of like what's normal, what's crazy. And we actually, I went out to meet up with them yesterday thinking that we were going to go on like an hour run, just kind of cruising. And we went for like an hour and 35 minutes, like a Wednesday morning, and I was like, whew, like this is like a midweek long run. Like I maybe went a little hard yesterday for this, but it's like, it wasn't anything super hard. It was just kind of cruising. And so it's a different sort of training. But yeah, I guess specifically to answer your question about coaching, like right now I'm just doing my own thing. I think I'm gonna, pick the brain of like Joe a bit. I know he does some coaching in the trail world. Also, Adam Chase is a guy that like, he'd offered to kind of help out. So I'll probably try to like get some advice from him. But other than that, like honestly, I'm just like excited for a bit of like change of mind frame, and also just like having a little bit less structure than the track was, where it was like, I think if you miss a run, or you miss an interval, or you have to push something back, or like one little thing is off when you're training on the track, sometimes it can feel like you've blown the race, like there goes
Really?
it's like a month from now. Whereas like I think, and maybe like my mindset is just not fully attuned to the trail yet, but I get the feeling that it's a bit more with some of the longer stuff that, it's not about like milliseconds at the line that might separate first and second. It's like there's so much that happens out there that it like you kind of get the understanding that like, hey, one wrong step isn't going to throw off my whole race. Whereas as the track, it is down to the micro, fractions of a second. And so you do tend to overthink things more. So
That's something I had never considered, whether there are more second and third chances in a training block when you're getting ready for an ultra or just trails in general versus the roads and on the track. Because like you said, the finishing times, the differences are milliseconds. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that at all. One other question I wanted to ask you is, so you mentioned Seattle, and that's where you're training right now. Would you ever consider doing like training camps in other locations to train specifically for events? Or do you think that in Seattle, you can meet most of the demands of the races you're prepping for?
Yeah, no, I plan to actually go to the mountains at some point to do some training. I think probably more than most, I need that kind of specific camp for this, even though we've spent, probably more time than a lot of people in like Albuquerque or something. It's all been flat running. So like, I plan to spend some time in Bend. It's not elevation necessarily, but it's got a lot of good trail stuff. And I know we have another portion of our team up there. So I'd like to do some longer camps training there. And I also like I said, I love Colorado. And so like, I'd love to go kind of base out of Boulder for a bit, train there, or maybe even go high, go up towards like Crested Butte, go up towards like Buena Vista, Salida, that area, and just kind of drop out and just kind of like, work, train, and gear up for something, especially if it's going to be like a high mountain sort of thing where, you're racing at 6,000+ feet.
Wow, that's cool. And like you would do that this summer, like for example, if you were getting ready for Broken Arrow, or again, I'm just speaking hypothetically, a race like Speed Goat here in Utah, for example, you would go and do like 2 or 3 week stretches in places like Colorado or Bend.
Yeah, that would be the plan. I mean, we've done, a decent amount of like, I think that's one perk of like having the track lead into this, is like we've done a decent amount of that altitude stints before. And so like, we've done the blood work going in, coming back down. So like I have a pretty good idea of like the amount of time I need to spend at altitude to really get like the benefits of like, basically the red blood cell boost is what you go there for.
Yeah.
But on top of that, I think like the trail world, there's a secondary boost because you're living where you can run out your door to train on the terrain that like you're going to be racing on. And so, I think it's probably the most essential for me kind of earlier in this like trail running kind of career or transition. Because I think just from yesterday, my quads were thrashed today running flat. So got my work cut out for me.
Yeah, in the trail world, I guess you're learning an 8 or a 10 mile run, even it might have taken you 45, 50, 55 minutes on the roads. It can be upwards of 2.5 hours on the trails, depending on what you're looking at in terms of climbing and descending.
Yeah, it's a bit of a change in mindset where if you finish a run that's, hour and 35 minutes and it's 9 miles, I'm like, I gotta switch on thinking about this because that's, like we were going that slow. Felt so much harder than that.
One other question I had here is, what does Brooks' support look like through this venture into the trails? Is it correct in saying that you're no longer directly affiliated with Brooks Beast, or are you still there in some capacity?
In my mind, I'm still associated with him, but um, there hasn't been like an official distinction on that. But I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not training with the team on a daily basis, and so like, no, I think like at this point, I am just like part of the Brooks Trail team. I don't know if we have an official name for that at this point, but yeah, still connected with the Beasts, but not in the same way. I mean, like I said, the Beasts are a very unique group in the sense that like it really is like a college team. So you get to train together 5 days a week, if not more. And so like you're just doing everything together, and you've got a great support system built around that from Danny, who's the head coach, and Sarah, who was the massage therapist, and just kind of like the all-encompassing kind of support there. Whereas now I'm still interfacing with a lot of different pieces there, but not tied in, not specifically part of the team.
Would Brooks ever consider doing like a co-located trail team in the same way that they have the Beasts?
I think they would consider it, and I know they've sponsored a handful of athletes in Bend and a handful of athletes in Seattle here now for a while. I think there's other challenges beyond just the sponsor. From my very limited time in the trail world here, I think a lot of trail athletes tend to, for better or worse, be a little bit older and kind of like have an ingrained like routine with either their career or family or just kind of like how they operate. And so, not to say that you couldn't still build a team, but the Beast team, you can do some other things on the side, but for the most part, like that, it's like all encompassing. So it's like, if it's like, hey, we're going to altitude in Albuquerque next week, it's like, you're going, so it's like, it's a bit, I think, it could happen in the trail world, but it might have to, it does require a bit of like upfront communication and strategizing around how that would actually be set up.
This idea of trail running teams is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I think you're one of the best people to talk about it with, because you have the experience being a part of a pro team in another area of running. And maybe we can just dive into it. And I'll ask you first, like, what was it like being on the Brooks Beast team from a day-to-day standpoint? Like, if you were plotting out what like a typical day looked like getting ready for some marquee event on your schedule, what were you doing from like sun up to sundown?
Yeah, like we met basically Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. We worked out Tuesday, Friday, long run on Sunday, and for the most part we met at 10 a.m. for practice. We had you wanted to, not that you need to meet at 10 a.m. to maximize sleep, but I think, we do have some younger people that were coming out of college. And so people's sleep schedules are different. And so like, meet at 10 to, one, avoid, traffic in Seattle, but two, just to allow people like the opportunity to fully maximize sleep, get up when you can. It's like we had a nutritionist who helped kind of like maximize what you were eating on your workout days. One of the big things he talked about was like pancakes. Was a big pre-race meal, mainly because of the carbohydrates in it without having a ton of protein, a ton of fiber in it. And So it's like, yeah, you'd get up, you'd have your pancakes, you'd, hit coffee for me. And then it's like you meet the team to practice at 10 a.m. If we're up in Albuquerque, where we spent a lot of time, it's like you got a 30-minute drive. So you're driving to the track, get there, you may be rolling out, kind of like some people will meet up. Our massage therapist was with us full time. So she's at the track, a handful of people maybe see her beforehand to get some treatment.
Yeah.
Or just to get some kind of mobilization stuff done. Otherwise, people are rolling out, whatever. And then, it's like you do the workout, which typically could take anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours between, warm up, main part of it, cool down, doing a little bit of treatment at the track after. And then typically we'd go straight to lifting. You maybe eat a snack on the way there, but, then you go to the gym and lift on a workout day for about, for me, it was maybe 45 minutes, but some people going as long as like an hour 15 to maybe hair over that. And so like, yeah, you just end up getting back home probably like at 3 p.m., 3:30 on one of those days, after kind of like maybe you probably have a snack and you eat like a 3 p.m. lunch or something. And then you've got like, a lot of people take a quick nap. Some people will double back on workout days, even for like an easy shakeout at night. And it's like you cook dinner and, kind of it's a lot about recovery then. Maybe people are normateching or rolling out at the house, and then you're going to bed and restarting the next day. And so it's like, very easy to use up an entire day just running, eating, recovering, when you're putting kind of like as much as you can into kind of each of those steps. So
I was just going to ask, even on the non-workout days, for example, did you feel like there were enough elements of training that added up to a full day? Or were there moments where you felt like there was a lot of free time?
There's definitely moments where you think where there's a lot of free time, and I did some part-time work while I was training, but it needed to kind of be flexible. And, I think for us, like particularly Wednesdays and Saturdays were the big days where you ran on your own, or you could kind of set your own schedule, and you just had one easy run. So you basically, it was like an hour of training. And so those were the days where it's like, yeah, you felt like you had a lot of time to like reset, but you also ended up like shopping or whatever for the week, or getting things done to kind of prep for the rest of the week on those days.
What did you see as the pros and the cons of the overall lifestyle, like looking back?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the massive pros are just being around the team and having a bunch of people training for the same things you are, and like building confidence off of each other on a daily basis, where, everybody has their ups and downs, but if overall you're in that team environment, like I think you can kind of see where things are headed a lot better. You can feel more comfortable in what you're doing. If like everybody's taking an easy day, you're okay like taking an easy day. Sometimes if you're training alone, it's hard to take an easy day. It's hard without feeling like the rest of the world is getting ahead of you. And then like I think being able to spend all of the time that you need to on any particular element, like particularly if you're injured, or dealing with some kind of like minor ailment, being able to have the time to like really put into the energy into that problem. As well as I think like, for me, sleep was one of the biggest things. I think sleep and hydration are two of like the most underrated elements. And a lot of my best seasons came when I was sleeping the most.
What's a lot? What's sleeping a lot for you?
For me, it's only like 8 to 9 hours. But some people will sleep 10 to 10 to 11. But for me, like last year, like I would lay in bed longer than I wanted to, but I would sleep, basically force myself to stay in bed for 9 hours. And, kind of wind down and really focus on recovery, because I think if you're trying to ride the line, you are kind of feeling like you're always on that cusp of like potentially breaking down. And the way to really make sure that you're not all of a sudden kind of tipping over the edge is getting a lot of sleep. And if you're not at night, taking a nap during the day. And so, specifically in the last year or two, I would nap for an hour plus during the day as well, which is like crazy for me. I hate napping. And so like that was like, I would prefer not to do that, but I do believe in like the benefits of it enough that it just made sense if you've got the time. So like, I think the downsides is like, the biggest downside is you can focus too much on the details and kind of like miss out on even just some of the most basic elements. Sometimes it's like you're focusing on all these things that are maybe the last 1% and just kind of miss out on maybe that big chunk that's actually going to get you most of the way to being where you want to be on a start line. And you can just overthink, honestly, when you got your own thoughts that much of the day to really play around with in your own head. I think you can end up tending to overthink kind of certain elements of what you're doing. So,
well, it's interesting. There's very few athletes on the trail side for a lot of reasons that aren't full time. There's a handful. I think Courtney Dauwalter is one athlete that does it full time. Jim Walmsley's another. Generally, very few and far between. The biggest reason that I hear is there's this fear that if you get injured, for example, that you wouldn't be able to mentally cope with, your one thing every day being, stripped out from under you, and whether you could deal with the recovery process and how that would affect the rest of your racing schedule and your status in the sport. So I'm curious, I'm assuming you've had at least a couple injuries in the past and you've been out for some stretches. How did you approach those scenarios and sort of keep the faith and stay true to the craft and not want to like bounce to another profession?
Yeah. I had recently I had some plantar fasciitis for about a year and a half, from, gosh, I think it would have been the start of 2019 through like late or like September 2020, when I ended up getting PRP on it. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mental grind, when you're injured. And I had a lot of roller coasters through that where things were going well and I could still train through it a lot of the time, but like it's always just nagging in the back of your mind, to like sometimes where I did just specifically take time off or was just biking.
Yeah.
For me, it was like, a lot of it was just trying to channel that energy somewhere else. And so I've never really cared about like Strava segments or anything like that on running, but like, with cycling, when I was cross training, it was like, yeah, that motivated me. Like I'd go find some Strava segments and try to go hammer as hard as I could or whatever. But, just trying to like find other ways to like be engaged and competitive outside of running. And I know sometimes like you can't even cycle, like you can either maybe swim or you just kind of like have to have time completely off. And in those moments, like finding something mentally to focus on, whether it's like a project or like starting to think about like different career stuff or something like that, like outside of running, has been helpful for me, because the more you dwell on it, the more sometimes you can just really put yourself in a dark place and start to kind of feel a bit overwhelmed that you're losing time and fitness on everyone. And, how are you ever going to get back to competing with these people that are putting 6 months of training on you that you're never going to get back?
Do you think that looking back, you had a competitive advantage being a full-time runner? Or do you think that those benefits are somewhat negligible compared to someone that's like also a teacher and they're getting in the same amount of training, but it's in a more compressed part of the day?
I think it really varies person to person. I really felt like there were some times where I benefited from being just a runner. But I've gone back and forth a lot during my career. Like, I stayed around Stanford, did the master's and a year of the PhD. And then I coached for a fall there. And then, worked for a startup in the Bay for some time. So like, and then in the last couple of years, actually also worked kind of part-time on the side. So like, I I've personally gone back and forth because like I feel like I can get a lot out of it just focusing on running and only being a runner for a period of time. But then I start to get a bit stir crazy and I feel like I need something else to kind of like balance it out. Otherwise, I think there just becomes sometimes I think like I have this like mental curiosity to do something else, but also like you just kind of you start to get a little stale, and also you just maybe overthink things a bit too much, just kind of being so single-minded for so long. So I would say like, sorry, this is like pretty long-winded answer of
Oh no,
answering
this is
the
great. This is
question,
great.
but I think there is something to be said for only running, and there's a lot that can be gained from that. But the other stresses that you have in your life, when you remove those and you go to a race, I think those people, the relief that comes in like the fun and excitement that comes of running and going to racing is like an overwhelming feeling that they can tend to like actually allow you to race better sometimes. Or at least that's been my experience. So,
well, it's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by the question is in almost every other pro sport, like whether it's football or basketball or soccer, it's almost unheard of for the athletes in that sport to do anything on the side, unless they're like, like a LeBron James and they have like some investment portfolio in the off season, but like they're all in, like they're in. It's interesting in running, and maybe I don't know why the reason is, but you can still, there's great examples on both sides of people who do it full time that are incredibly successful, and people like, I just saw that woman, Kira D'Amato, who's like a real estate agent, and she just ran 2:19 in the marathon. It's amazing.
right. Yeah, I think like it's about finding the job that fits well with running, right? Like I think it's going to be hard to work a 70-hour a week, like banking or consulting job, but if you can find something that's a bit flexible and something that like isn't overwhelming as far as like the energy you need to put in, I think it can be super sustainable. Because even if you look at like a LeBron James, you look at some of these like other sports, they're doing, they've got all these marketing, movie, all these other commitments on the side and little projects that they're trying to do. So like, but they're very flexible in those projects.
Yeah.
So I think allowing yourself to have that flexibility or finding a situation where you do can almost be the perfect setup for some people, at least.
Looking back, or at least in this moment, do you recommend it, going full time on running if you have the opportunity?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I think it's a chance to really see how much you can maximize every part of your life towards running, and you can see some massive gains quickly. So, if given the opportunity, why not go for it?
Well, going back to the Brooks Beasts talk for just a second, you mentioned that you were running with a team, sounds like 5 days a week plus lifting. Were there any other elements of the team that felt like the college experience where you're like living and breathing the lifestyle like 24/7, like living in the dorms together and stuff? Like, were there any other elements of the team that made it feel like that experience, that college experience?
Yeah, we'd spend probably like almost 3 months a year at altitude camp. And at those camps, we're in a house together, with anywhere from like three of us in a house at a time to there were times when we went to Flagstaff that I can remember like 12, like men, women, everybody was smashed in one house together. And so like that very much feels like, the college vibes. And so I think you're just kind of like, it's just kind of your group for everything, whether it's running, social, kind of like all parts of your day is just hanging out with that group of people. And I think that's one thing that, really in college, I think allows people to thrive, is when you have that group around you, it's easier to make some of the right decisions, right? Like if your peer group is the people that are going out and staying out late and, whatever, it's like, it's hard to sometimes be the person that's like, oh, like I'm going to go home, and I always be the one that's a bit lame or doing something else. Whereas like, if you're surrounded by a group of people that like, yeah, you're going to have fun when it's like, when the time's right. But like, when things are serious in season and you're getting ready for a big race, like you're just hunkered down. Like a big night might be playing a board game, and like, maybe you're having like a board game and drinking a beer after like a big workout day, and like that's a wild night, so like, but you surround yourself with like people doing the same thing as you, and I think it really helps like everybody kind of reinforcing a lot of the right decisions.
Okay, side note for a second. Speaking of board games, have you ever played Settlers of Catan?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Isn't it the best? Like a beer and a game of Catan. That at this point in my life is as good as going out to the bars on a Friday night.
Yeah, we've played relatively recently, actually, for the first time in quite a while. But yeah, there was a time where we played a lot of Settlers with the team at altitude camp.
It's a fantastic game. I get fixated in these crazy strategies like building longest road and not focusing on like the development cards and building cities and settlements. But anyways, love that game. Sorry, side tangent there. Well, one thing I'm curious about is, and maybe you don't have insight into this, but maybe you do, so I'll ask, what are some of the conditions that allow for a track or a road running team to form? Because we don't have any yet on the trails. So I'm curious if there's any lessons that we can pick up from what allowed like the Brooks Beasts, for example, to take off.
Yeah, I think you need a sponsor or a group of sponsors probably willing to put some money into it. But I think you also, like, more than anything, you need probably one person who's willing to like really spearhead the initiative to like build a group, whether that's a coach, whether that's an athlete, who can be like this advocate who like goes to the brand, or who goes, even if you don't get a brand off the bat, who like can get buy-in from a handful of athletes. Because ultimately, like, if you build a group, you're going to have to get blind buy-in from at least a small group of athletes to say like, yeah, I want to move to this location, or I want to like change my training or what my way of life to like, and probably everyone make some sacrifices to like try to make this group work and to buy into. I think you need, some people might disagree, but I think you need a central coach if you really have a strong team. And so like, those people have to like agree that like this is a good coach and someone that they all want to work with and are willing to buy into their training philosophy, or at least their kind of like approach to things. And that will, I think that will allow you to create like the strongest, most cohesive group that like has the best opportunity to like, one, get sponsors, but two, just like be sustainable in the long run. Because otherwise, if everybody has different coaches, it can work, but like ultimately over time, things are going to fragment. It's a lot easier for there to be like issues over whose training is doing what and like actually matching up. So yeah, I think that one big advocate, have a centralized coach, and then ultimately trying to gain some support from at least one major brand.
In the case of Brooks Beasts, was it a coach that kicked things off, or was it a particular athlete that recruited other runners?
As far as my understanding, I think a lot of it. So Jesse Williams, who's the guy who puts on the Sound Running meets now, was working at Brooks, and he had been an athlete himself, and like, was very much like committed to like supporting elites. And so I think he was one of the big drivers for it, from the Brooks side, to like create that team here in Seattle that was a bit more of like a college, kind of a college vibe than like some of the other teams. And then, he's good buddies with Danny Mackey, who is the coach of the Beast. And I think then Danny really helped kind of like bring it was Danny's like really, I think, his first coaching job, but he kind of had the perspective to at least like understand what it would take to build this group. And so those two working together, as well as like obviously getting the support of like a handful of like very high up Brooks kind of management, they were, able to like kind of like get things going. And I think, yeah, a lot of credit has to go to like Brooks of like just believing in the vision that Jesse maybe initially had.
Yeah.
And I think it also helped from our standpoint that the Brooks Hanson's group has been around for a while, and had a lot of success. And so there was a model that it could work. But still, it is a hard thing to start for sure.
How important is mission in this whole team formation too? Like I know when I think of like Nike Oregon project, for example, the first thing that comes to mind is, we exist to bring medals back to the US. Was there like a similar guiding purpose for you guys every single year?
Yeah, I think, on the track, ultimately it is to like bring medals back. I think regardless of what your group is, like, um, I think the trail world could be a little bit different because at least with my understanding, there's a few different pockets of areas that, you can really focus. Whereas like most track groups in the US, at least on the distance side, it's like the goal is world championships and Olympics, but I think, there is like this ultimate bigger goal that like, I think helped with Brooks of like, we want to integrate this team into the company and like, resonate with the run happy vibes that Brooks has, and utilize them to like help build our footwear, help improve our apparel. One of the, I think, neatest parts of being on the Beast team was being in Seattle next to the company and getting to like know a lot of the people in those different roles, have an impact on spikes that were being made, have an impact on the shoes that we were coming out with, or the the new elite apparel kits. Like I think there's a lot that can be said for those interactions, and I think that's another way that like hopefully the trail scene, I think, could start to think about like having some more groups. Is the trail gear, apparel, footwear is becoming much more important, and so like they're going to need input from experts at these major shoe brands, apparel brands, on how to make that work, and so yeah, I think that's been neat for, I think, the athletes, and hopefully useful for the company as well.
Man, that's a great take. I think the first part you said with like world championships and medals, the issue in trail running is we don't have an Olympics to refer to, and there's multiple brands that are claiming to be the world championship for all sorts of events. So from like a logic or like a structure standpoint, a logic standpoint, there's a lot of confusion around what athletes should be directing their attention towards and working towards from a competitive standpoint. And that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother episode. But the latter part you mentioned about like representing brand and technology and gear, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
One other question I wanted to ask you here before the lightning round. Well, actually, I have two for you. The first is given that you've been embedded in these other running worlds for so long, what has been the perception of trail and ultra running among fellow athletes, and what has been their take so far of you making this switch?
There's not a whole lot of overlap between like trail, ultra, and the track world. It's like they're pretty much two completely separate worlds at this point. And so like, it's been a lot of really like good feedback from like the Beast team and other people that I know in like the track world. But I think like just kind of excitement about like the unknown, like, what are you doing? Or like, like excited for me, but also just like, what does that mean? Because like there's not really an awareness in the track world as to like what exactly is trail. Is that are there 5K trail races? Is there a 25K trail race? Is trail only like Western states and like stuff that's like 100+ miles? I think I had like a bit of like a epiphany, or just kind of like mind blown sort of situation talking to Joe the other day, and I was just kind of asking about some of his races, and he's like, yeah, actually I kind of consider like anything under like 2 nights of sleep like out on the trail as like middle distance. Like, so like a 250 miler is like a bit of a mid D race. And I was like, well, count me in as a sprinter then. But like, like you forget about, because he's done some of the FKTs for like, Pacific Crest Trail and going for the Appalachian Trail and stuff like that. And so it's, yeah, it's been, I think, a lot of excitement, but like, I think both for me as well as like other people that I know in the track world is like, that's great that you're like committing to trail, but like, what does that mean? And that's the part that I'm hoping to like help bridge, of like, hey, this is a transition that can be made. And I think you've seen it some with like, Mako was a track guy in college. Like Jim Walmsley, I think, is probably the most well-known in the US as like a track guy that's gone to trail.
Yeah.
I think Sage Canaday was also in that kind of realm. And so there is like this building momentum for people who run track in college to go to transition into the trail. But like, I think making that a bit more accessible will allow that transition to happen more often. So, or at least that's my hope.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what do you think is hesitating or stopping more runners of your caliber and even earlier in their careers from taking this route?
I think the distance, the expectation that like the distance is like 100 miles plus, or like, bare minimum 50 miles plus is like one big barrier entry. If you're a 1500 or even up to 10K runner in college, like thinking about going, particularly if you're like, if you've done very well and you're a talented like collegiate athlete, to say like, okay, now I'm going to just drop all of that, go to a terrain that's completely unknown, and at best like multiply my distance by 20. Like it's a hard commitment to make. So I think the fact like making awareness of some of the shorter races, as well as like I think just seeing some people like Jim Walmsley do so well at a younger age will be helpful, because it does seem like it's always seemed a bit, it's similar to the marathon. Like the marathon always used to be like you go through college, after college you'd hit the track, and as you got older you'd slowly move up in distance until finally you lost all your speed and you moved up to the marathon. Not specifically that, but something kind of like that. Whereas like now I think we're seeing, the Molly Seidel's of the world, we're seeing like a lot more like, Scott Fauble, a lot of like the NAZ elite group, like just like a lot of younger people make the commitment from the marathon or for the marathon who have been good in college. And I think as trail popularity grows and as like this kind of elite group in the trail world starts to form even more, like, I think we'll see that more in the trail world too. Particularly as sponsors start to put money there, because, ultimately money is what draws people at the highest levels. Like, is particularly if you're trying to make a living from this, or like make this a career, you need to find ways to make money. So,
well, and I don't know the answer to this question, but it's something interesting to speculate on. And that is, if you're, for example, a 213 male marathoner, or you are a 247 female marathoner, my instinct would tell me you could actually probably make, if your goal is to make a living as a runner, you could probably have better chances making a living on the trails than on the roads. And there'd be more brands willing to, give you a contract just based on that foot speed and potential that could translate to ultras. So that might be an interesting selling point, is if you're right on that cusp of like truly elite, maybe you go try out the trails, because there's just lower barrier to entry and competition, and you'll be like a bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, even in, I think one issue even in the track world is there's, track athletes tend to have agents communicate with the shoe brands. You typically don't communicate with the brands directly as an athlete. And so like when an athlete graduates from college, it's very unknown, even for the people at the top end of the sport, as to like, what's next? Like, what do I do? What are the next steps? And so like, there's enough people in the track world, and it's happened enough now that like you do have connections and people that can help you navigate that. But like, I think in the trail world, it just, the ecosystem's not built out enough. So like, I can see if I was coming out of college and trying to figure out how to do that, I don't know where you'd start, because most agents don't deal with trail stuff, and most brands, you don't even know who to start by emailing. You don't know what to ask for, so like, I think one major step, and it goes back to what you've been saying with groups, would be if these brands, or if there's brands that start to really say like, hey, I want to throw money into trail. And I think Brooks is starting to do that with our group here, but say like, hey, we're going to put a lot of money behind a trail team. We're going to like make this work, and we're going to try to start like make it a viable option for people so that they know it's there, and it's something to shoot for and kind of aspire to coming out of school. Then I think you will start to get better and better athletes. You might not get like, the 10K NCAA champ right off the bat, but 10 years from now, you might,
We love talking business opportunities on this show too, in the running space. And that's a good one, is finding a way to be like the intermediary between trail brands and these somewhat marquee athletes coming out of college.
Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a lot of people in the trail world that could get, I think trail athletes, from what I've seen so far, and maybe just watching Mako, are very savvy in being able to like garner sponsorships and stuff like that, and actually very much better than track athletes at marketing themselves. And so like, I think there is an opportunity here for more sponsorship, for like gaining more exposure with some of these brands, because there's a growing group that's interested in trail running in the general population, and there's a growing group of athletes that are very good at marketing themselves, and ultimately that's what this is marketing.
That's a fantastic point. And I would also just add that like one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on trail running teams is because I look at teams like Brooks Beast and Bowerman and Hoka Naz Elite. And because you're in that team environment, it's just easier to create content for social media and YouTube and everything the brand needs. Like, it almost takes care of itself because you have a coach or some assistant who can snap photos, take videos, catch the just all the key moments. Like, that's something that's missing in this side of the sport. And like, we already have the athletes that are savvy individually, and you bring it all together in a team setting, it's probably dynamite.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the many things that I think the trail athletes have going for them is the scenery, and like the races, and like the stuff that people are doing is just incredible. And so like, I'm just, as someone who hasn't been in the trail world, just absolutely fascinated following along with like these races, like, whether it's the Western states, and like what people are putting their bodies through. And like, I think you can live this experience with the athletes a lot more in a trail race than you can in like a track race. It's like 4 minutes and it's over. I think there's a lot of really cool parts about the track, but the trail is like, as a follower, you can really like feel like you're there with them. And so like, even following along with like, I'm blanking on the race that's happening right now, but the crazy one where you gather.
Barkley.
Yeah. Like, I've been following that a bit, and it's like, it's crazy, like, and it's super interesting to just see what extremes are going to, and like the elements out there. And, I think some of those battles is like what people want to see, and ultimately what sells for these brands. So yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity.
Let's go to the lightning round here. First question: is there a greater than 35% chance that you will do either the Western States 100 or Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc at some point in your career?
I think it's lower.
Okay. Have there been any failures or apparent failures during your running career or in some other area of life that have actually set you up for later success?
Yeah. First one that comes to mind is I got outkicked every time my sophomore year of high school in cross country by the same guy, to the point that we stopped and walked one time. And then he still wouldn't lead. So I took off, and sure enough, he outkicked me again. And that next year, the entire year, all I worked on was my kick, and that was my strength for the next 5 years.
What is something you used to believe strongly about running that you have recently changed your mind about?
Um, Sleep. I think that's one. Never didn't think it was that important, but in the last couple of years, really, yeah, really changed my mind on it.
What was the last good book, movie, or podcast you consumed, and what was good about it?
Let's see. Other than yours, other than this podcast, well, I'll throw one out there for Josh and Dave on the team, Sit and Kick. I did listen to some of that yesterday, their podcast. Those are two guys on the beast. But Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, I listened to that recently. And I think I like him a lot more after listening. I liked him before, but it's a super interesting book if you haven't read or listened to it.
I've listened to it, and he's on my narration Mount Rushmore alongside Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
Last question. If you could put a message on a billboard for all to see, what would it say and why?
Go to the mountains. I think being in nature and just like exercise, there's just so many wellness benefits that come from that, mentally, physically, everything else. So
Garrett, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say we are excited about your entry into the trail scene, and I know I will be following your race schedule closely, and maybe we can chat again at some point in the future.
absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me on.